right. Good evening. Can everybody hear me? Hi, Margaret. And welcome everyone to the May District 3 community meeting. We will have a special guest here. I assume momentarily it'll be the city manager, but he is not on quite yet. So I figured we would just get started, and then when he pops in, we can go into the budget discussion. As you know, we've done this, I think, almost every year I've been in office, but the budget for the fiscal year 22-23 just came out on Monday, and then the council received that. We opened up a public hearing last night. We received the budget and the capital improvement projects plan for the next 5 years. And we will resume that public hearing at our first meeting. I believe it's June 7th, and then we will do it again the following Tuesday, and then the third Tuesday in June is typically when we have traditionally voted on and passed a budget. We have to have that done per our charter before the end of June. So this year, the budget is what we would call a restoration budget. We are trying to make up for, I don't know if the word deficiencies is the right word, but we're trying to make up for things that have happened over a variety of years, probably since the last recession, but more so, I think many of the cuts and the tightening of the belt we had to do as a result of COVID and the loss of revenue streams that are important to any city that is doing what it does on a day-to-day basis, which is provide services to all its residents. So with that said, I see Mike has popped on, so let me introduce everyone to since the last time you saw him here in the District 3 community meeting, he was our assistant city manager. Now he is our city manager. So Mike, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, good. So Mike, why don't we just start before we get into any questions and whatnot? Why don't we just start with kind of an overview and give people a little bit of background, because I think what is good to know about Mike is that not only has he been with the city for a long time, but he has served in a variety of different capacities, which in my opinion lends to his strength serving as a city manager, because he has worked in multiple departments and also as an assistant city manager. And I think that lends itself to creating not only a holistic view on what needs to happen citywide, but I think the larger 30,000 foot view. So Mike, why don't you give us a little bit of background, and then let's kind of jump into talking about this year's budget from your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, I do think, having spent time in a variety of operating departments, as Christian mentioned, it gives you that service and operations experience, and you start to understand really how we deliver, services to the community and what's required for us to be successful in doing that. I think that's been helpful along the way, particularly as it's meant informing budgets. And in my role as assistant city manager, carried that experience and working with our prior city manager to formulate recommendations to the mayor and council. And really, it's always with the notion of, assuming we have strong revenues, we're in a mode of trying to enhance service, expand service, improve service. When we're in a retrenchment mode, which Christian alluded to, we've been in, unfortunately, many years in the last decade, certainly since the Great Recession. It feels like we've been doing more budget cutting over the last 10 years than we've been doing budget augmentation. So that's, it changes the approach. If we're in a cutting mode, it's talking with the departments to figure out how we can trim without decimating service. When we're in augmenting mode, it's how can we provide resources that really improve on and deliver the services the community desires. So thankfully, we're in that latter mode now. We are benefiting from a very significant pot of what I would call one-time, you could call it savings, funds, however you want to classify it, really that stem from two really positive things. The first one is the city's decision to refinance its PERS pension obligation debt. I don't want to get too complicated, but and I may have talked a little bit about this when I was before this group last year, but under the old CalPERS formula, we had an escalating, what they describe as an unfunded accrued liability. It's all the costs that the city has for the next 30 years associated with pensions, not for just its current employees, but all of its past employees, all the people that were living longer than originally expected, had earned more than maybe CalPERS actuaries had predicted, and ultimately there needed to be more funding put into the state coffers to allow for those annual pension annuities. Well, under that formula with PERS, the city was having to effectively pay 7% interest on the outstanding money owed. So we really had what you would call a 7% mortgage for a figure that CalPERS itself controlled. And at one point, that figure, that unfunded accrued liability, might have been 30 million. And then with adjustments to formulas and actuarial assumptions, it's now 90 million. Oh, and then life expectancy growth, now it's 100 million. It got to a point where the city's unfunded accrued liability, by PERS's own math, was roughly $225 million. Well, imagine, we're paying 7% on that money as an employer every year. There are circumstances where PERS wouldn't necessarily charge us that 7% in the event that when they earned money in excess of 7%, we would get some credit for that. But they took it as, every year we anticipate we're going to earn 7% on the open market. If your money's not here to help us do that, we're going to collect that from you instead. So what did we do this last year? We went out in the bond market and borrowed money, borrowed the $225 million to pay to PERS all at one tranche. And guess what? We were fortunate, based on our timing, to only have to pay 2.8% on that money. So we basically, to put it into kind of simple home terms, we had a 7% mortgage that we reduced to 2.8%. And over 25 years, that's going to save the city, the community, $100 million in costs. Now, what made that even better last year is that we had assumptions about what PERS was going to charge us for what they called a supplemental unfunded accrued liability, not to get too technical. And we had borrowed a little bit extra money to cover that, what was secondary payment. That payment actually surprisingly came in lower than what we had set aside. So we had residual bond proceeds in the fiscal year that were just sitting there in a pot, and that we now have the opportunity to spend. So basically, extra bond money accrued to the general fund on a one-time basis in this last fiscal year. And then in addition to that, as you might all recall, the federal government issued not one, but two payments. The second one's still coming. It's coming next month for COVID relief. The American Rescue Plan that was enacted, the federal rescue plan, actually resulted in the city of Redondo Beach receiving, and we've got half the money now, we're going to get the other half next month, in total about a little under $7 million. So that money was more than really budgeted and anticipated for. We knew we were going to get half the money, but we got an extra half. And so long story short, this year we're sitting on significant one-time funds that we get to use now as part of our recommended budget going into the 22-23 fiscal year. So normally when we come to the council each year with a proposed budget, our starting fund balance isn't $11 million like it is this year. It's usually like $1 million or $500,000 or maybe $2 million. But this year we're benefiting from those one-time funds really giving us a nice starting position. And it's because of those that we're ultimately able to recommend a significant number of decision packages that allow us, for the first time in a very long time, to restore just about all the positions in the city and budgets that were cut either during the Great Recession or more recently during our initial reaction to the COVID pandemic. So it's nice to be able to restore funds. This council, this community really demands service. One of the things we're trying to do is to be more customer oriented, be more resident oriented, be more service oriented. When you cut budgets year over year in administrative staff or counter staff or frontline park services workers or even maintenance managers, it's hard to deliver that high level service that Redondo Beach residents are so accustomed to receiving and rightfully so demand from us. So it's great. This budget puts a lot of those staff positions back. And it actually, beyond that, puts a lot of the budgets back that were taken away from materials and supplies and all the little things to do things like plant trees or buy additional widgets to replace furniture and fixtures in our bathrooms and parks, or just all the little stuff that we have to do to maintain a high level of service delivery here in town. So the budget, as Christian mentioned, really is restorative in many ways. And then it also, I think, augments staff in the areas where this community has really desired. And I would call it in kind of two tranches. One, public works, capital projects, maintenance initiatives. This community really likes to see us execute those activities in a timely, in a swift way. We are running at max capacity with our existing number of engineers. We have roughly 7 engineers dedicated to capital project work at any given time. That's not a lot when you have a $75, $80 million CIP and 122 projects. You need more than that to move those out. So there's some recommendations to add additional engineering personnel to help us execute those projects more quickly for the community. And that ranges from things like roads to traffic calming to building improvements. It's all over the map, to waterfront initiatives, where we've got a lot of need, a lot of demand. So there's recommendations in the budget to try to address that and help us get better in that area and be more responsive to the community. And then another area that the council in particular has really pushed for is more dedicated resources to quality of life issues, like enforcing the city's codes, whether it be for the appearance of commercial buildings or codes associated to what is and isn't allowed in our parks, or what is and isn't allowed as it pertains to noise, or some of the other, not necessarily the hardcore crime stuff that we do from a policing standpoint, because we have resources for that, but really that more finite quality of life concerns that we have that we're fortunate as a community to actually be able to focus resources on. Not everybody can, right? They don't have that luxury. They have to just focus on the basics. Our community wants to see us do more in the way of environmental code enforcement, physical code enforcement, things like that. So we're proposing some additional resources in those areas to respond to that community desire. And then beyond that, there's some other really nice initiatives in there that I think the community would like to see. Enhanced roadway striping, additional trees, going back and looking at maybe updating our historic resources, inventory, some of the things that we haven't done ministerially for 25 years. We've got money in there to study sea level rise impacts and figure out how we want to begin to improve what we do in the waterfront as it relates to that. We've got money in there for a big pot of money in there. It's a healthy recommendation to restore a big component of our parking structure down in the waterfront. We have an opportunity to implement seismic upgrades to that facility that we would really like to see effectuated. So there's a lot of initiatives. There are 83 decision packages, as we call them, which are really proposed budget modifications beyond traditional core activities. So there's a lot for the council to sift through. There's a lot of line item details in there. But there's a lot of really good stuff that we're excited about that I think will help drive projects and activities that this community has really been longing for and will be really excited about when we execute on them. So when it's all said and done, our operating revenues and expenditures are slightly at deficit in this fiscal year. We're able to balance it with some of those one-time funds. But we have great confidence that as we get to full restoration on our revenue side, we're still missing about a little over $3 million of our core TOT revenue source because of agreements associated with the Marine Avenue hotel sites that allow them to direct their transient occupancy tax, their hotel bed tax, back to a reserve account that their banks needed when they first financed the construction of their property. So in the next fiscal year, 23-24, will actually be receiving an additional $3+ million a year in TOT from a general fund revenue standpoint. So while we're a little short on ongoing expenditures and revenues after decision packages this fiscal year, we feel confident that we'll achieve structural budget balance in the next fiscal year, which we haven't been able to say with a lot of confidence during the pandemic. We've always been chasing that structural balance because it's been uncertain as to where our revenues would ultimately be. Thankfully, our property tax revenues, our sales tax revenues have been strong and continue to grow. And that's really giving us some confidence to be a little more aggressive in our spending this fiscal year. So it's an exciting budget. There's going to be a lot for the council to chew on. You know, they're not going to love all 83 of the recommendations that we've made on the decision packages. They may not want to spend the full $4.5 or whatever it is $1 million to rehabilitate the pier parking structure and add, you know, seismic stability. They may want to do more. You know, they may want. It'll be interesting to see. So we've got a long dialogue ahead of us. A lot of different groups providing input. The Budget and Finance Commission will have 2 meetings to talk about it. The Harbor Commission has a meeting scheduled to talk about the budget. Our Planning Commission actually tomorrow night is going to be talking about what ultimately, you know, the capital projects look like from a general plan standpoint. Our Public Works Commission will look at stuff. So we get a lot of input. We went out and gathered a lot of input in preparing the budget. I personally visited just about every commission to get feedback from them on what they'd like to see in the proposed budget, as opposed to us just talking to them after it's been delivered to the city council. So we've tried to be as collaborative as we can here, and we try to create a budget that I think is reflective of our city council, our commissions, and our residents' needs and wants, you know, collectively. So we're excited about it, and we're looking forward to the conversation and whatever final fine tuning the city council ultimately directs. So hopefully that's a summary that makes some sense. Happy to go into any more detail or, you know, talk to revenues and expenses if you'd like. I know sometimes those subjects can be a little dry, but happy to have the conversation.
Well, good. Well, I'll pepper you with some questions to start off here. So, you know, one thing I should say, you know, is that I am truly appreciative of the way staff puts together the budget each year. And I'll put links in the chat for everyone so that you can actually go and see the budget documents and the capital improvement projects documents as well. And I'll also put on there, because, you know, we are fully supportive of being as transparent as possible with all the finances. I'll put our OpenGov link up there as well, because you can actually see year over year revenues, expenditures. You can drill down and really get a much more detailed idea of how funds are used and to which department they go to or to which projects they go to. I think if you know, are interested in geeking out like that, it's always fascinating to really see how a big machine works. And I'll reiterate again, you know, a city is not, you know, when Mike talks about revenues, we do have revenue sources coming in, but, you know, we're not a business, right? We're not trying to take in revenues to then to make money, right? We are basically, every city is kind of supposed to be a net zero at the end of the day, right? The monies that come in go back out, and those may pay for operational costs, or they may pay for services that the city provides, and or the capital improvements that we all use on a daily basis and probably take for granted most of the time. So so the decision packages, Mike alluded to them. They are kind of the framework of the budget, right? It's in the transmittal letter that comes from the city manager at the very beginning, and in many ways it tells the story of where we're at and why the staff is making the recommendations they are. And I've always my budget motion was the motion that carried through for 6 years up until last year. That was the first time that my motion didn't pass through. And I have pretty much for the most part really trusted and worked with staff to understand fully the why behind a lot of the decision packages. And I would say, you know, 90 98% of the time, I agree with them. And in some cases where I don't, the conversations that I have had with city management and with department heads really helps me gain a more granular understanding of that why. Why would we want to do or follow staff's direction on this? And they're in the weeds on a day-to-day basis. And they have a really good understanding of what we need and what we don't. And as a council person, my initial, thought process is to try to do the most I can for District 3 and or North Redondo. But at the end of the day, too, I have to look at it from, what is in the best interest of the city. And that can be challenging sometimes, because there have been many times where I have had to say, well, as much as I want this to happen, I'm going to have to trade off. Maybe I can, instead of making it happen right now, maybe I can accelerate a project, a capital project, and try to get it in the queue a little bit earlier than it's planned for. Or maybe I can start putting monies away for something else. So I've always tried to approach the budget in a responsible manner. And this kind of leads me to, Mike, you brought up a few times in your presentation there, the parking structure down in the pier area. And I want to start with there because, clearly, back to the comment I just made, my focus is always to how can I make sure that District 3 and or North Redondo is getting its fair share. And the waterfront for many years, right, has sucked up all the energy in the room. I'm sure, that it's just because it's a giant enterprise and operation, and it's in need of a lot of love, right? It wasn't fully taken care of over the years and maintained in a top A, grade A manner, to the point where it can be self-sustaining. So we have this parking structure that, had the Center Cal project gone through, would have actually been torn down and rebuilt to a standard that would meet today's requirements structurally to meet code as it relates to earthquakes and whatnot. Let's talk a little bit about this, because when Measure C passed and the waterfront project didn't go through, the city has been putting about $1.2 million or so into that structure on a year-over-year basis, or a year to 2 year basis, to ensure the integrity of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've spent, I think it's been more like $2 million every other year is kind of how it's worked by the time we design and then execute the project. We've done that a couple of times now. The structure is in solid shape. I mean, for a facility that was built, now 50, 60 years ago, the structure is, it's still there. The integrity of the structure is good. What happens, though, if you don't maintain it with this kind of $2 million restoration effort or rehabilitation, however you want to call it, it eventually, the end caps of the structure start to corrode. You see what's called concrete spalling, chunks kind of fall off. The rebar that's in those columns ultimately starts to corrode from the outside and starts to work its way towards the middle of the structure. And then if you ignore that for too long, you can start to create some integrity issues, actual physical integrity issues. Thankfully, we've done enough to, I think, avoid most of that. But we have to stay on that. It's very important that we spend a couple of $1 million every year to ensure that we don't create that problem for ourselves. Where we're more concerned longer term with the structure is in its level of seismic resistance, right? A structure that was built in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s was built to a different standard than what you would build it today. We happen to have an opportunity right now with the Fun Factory space being vacant. And if you know that area of the facility well, that the waterfront, the Fun Factory is effectively a cornerstone of the pier parking structure. It's really in the corner, and it's at ground floor. It's where columns meet turf, solid earth, and they actually have structural compaction. So there's a chance for us with the vacancy to actually spend money to add shear walls to that space and improve the seismic strength of the parking structure in general. And that's really why we're recommending both the next phase of rehabilitation work that's a couple $1 million, and then a couple $1 million of seismic upgrade work, because we have a unique opportunity without a tenant in there to get in there and do some real substantive stuff. And that's why, as painful as it is to recommend general fund monies that can be used on anything we do, we have a unique opening that I think with these funds we can take advantage of. And I will say, there is no waterfront without an active, healthy peer parking structure. That just doesn't exist. It has to be there. We have to have it. And investing in rehabilitating what we have and building longevity and improving its usefulness and functionality are really, I think, what we need to do to strengthen the waterfront as a whole. And that's why we've made the recommendation that we have. It's both opportunistic, it's recognizing that it's unique where we have these resources to spend, and it's an asset that desperately needs reinvestment. And it's those three factors that drove that recommendation.
Sure. If we didn't have these resources at our hand, what would have we done, right?
Well, we would probably, and we're going to have this conversation on June 14th. We're going to talk about borrowing. We may want to bond, to actually beef up some of our capital resources for these larger projects. But had we not had that money, you're going to get a report. Councilman Horvath hasn't seen this yet, but we have an engineer that periodically reviews the parking structure to analyze its integrity. And we renewed that study here a year ago to check on where we're at. It'd been a few years, and their report is back to us. And we're going to be presenting the findings in that report to the council on the 14th when we talk about capital improvements. And it's going to request and recommend that the city, really over the next 5 to 10 years, spend $20 million on the structure. There'll be more specifics when we get you the report, but in just broad round numbers, that's kind of the basic takeaway. And that doesn't mean it's imminently falling down. It's just that's the engineering's suggested best practice to ensure the extension in its useful functionality. So, when those types of reports come forward, we have to heed them to a degree, because we want to do what's right for the space. And certainly we want to make sure we do everything we can to avoid the catastrophe that we all, periodically you read about in the papers. We had, there was the incident in Florida a year ago, where things can go really bad. And it's important that we invest to protect ourselves against that. And we all know, living in LA, that there's always the chance that there's going to be a big earthquake that could really cause problems for us. And if there's a way, there's no assurances, right? I mean, certain size earthquakes could just be more than any facility can handle. But if there's a chance for us to maybe buffer that a little bit and feel a little bit more comfortable about our seismic strength, I think it's a chance, it's an opportunity worth taking.
Sure. And, I think what I'll say here is I've said this to Mike privately, but I'll say it publicly. There's a bit of frustration and sadness on my part here when it comes to having this conversation, because this is not shocking news to any of us, right? It was communicated to the city, to the residents. Staff knew this, many years ago, and that's why the city engaged in what ultimately became a 15-year process of trying to figure out how to revitalize an aging waterfront that was going to require a sizable investment from an infrastructure perspective to meet the needs of the area, and then to eventually, become a self-sustaining entity, because the harbor and the pier is within our tidelands or our uplands area. And so it's a harbor enterprise, and that enterprise is supposed to be self-sustaining. Ideally, we're not necessarily supposed to use general fund monies to complement it. That's what Mike is talking about here, is that we will take monies from the general fund that otherwise would be going to either supplementing other services or capital needs throughout the city, and we'll be putting it into the waterfront area. And so from my perspective, it is frustrating. I've taken a lot of flack over the years for voting to support what was called the Center Cal project, but it was really the revitalization of the harbor and pier, because a lot of these costs would have been taken care of, and they wouldn't have come out of the city's pocket. They would have come out of that private-public partnership perspective, with the partner developer taking the onus of those infrastructure costs, and they would have rebuilt that parking structure from the ground up. Now, let's just point out here, Mike is talking about something that requires our attention, if you will, immediately. And he just put a $20 million price tag on it to basically fix up the existing structure. I think the estimates, for building a new structure were in the more of the $50 million range, but we're still, as he's talking about, over the coming years, still going to spend $20 million on top of, whatever the 3 to 6 million that we've spent in the past 5 years. So,
well, and out of fairness, what I would add is, the old estimates on replacement, at 50 million in today's dollars and current supply chain and inflation, it'd be, I'm sure, 100 or
that's right,
million plus. Yeah. So replacing the structure today is very costly. And I don't want to create too much alarm with that $20 million figure. That's coming from our public works folks. I haven't even seen that in detail yet. That's just the high level summary they've given me, that, over the next 5 to 10 years, that's the kind of investment, which isn't surprising if every other year you're supposed to be spending $2 million. So it's just the nature of being a landlord of an asset like the pier parking structure on a waterfront like ours. It's a corrosive environment. Maintaining anything next to the ocean is hard to do. It just is. It's expensive. It requires repetition. It requires routine, scheduled maintenance. It's just the nature of the business. And, it's very important that we have a structure like that to support our functions down there. They can't live without it. They really can't. The structure is essential to what we do.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think there's any argument there. I think, and these are good things for residents to hear and consider, right? Because you just alluded to the fact that public infrastructure, the costs to do projects only exponentially grows every year, right? So, had we done something sooner, right, we would have already seen a return on the investment, but as we wait to do projects, as time goes on, and especially right now, and in a period where inflation is just, a bit out of whack. Even lumber, just to do some simple stuff in Franklin Park right now, the cost estimates I'm hearing from our team are just ridiculous. They weren't that way 2 years ago, right? So these are judgment calls that a city council will have to make, and I just want residents to understand that every decision out there that is made by a council is far more complex than any of the sound bites or the rhetoric that you may see on social media or read in the papers or whatnot. These are complicated decisions to make, and as I said earlier, we really have to think about what is in the best interest of the city overall, and sometimes that requires us to make hard decisions that may not intimately benefit the specific area that we represent. So hence my frustration and, maybe a little bit of anger, that we're having to have this conversation. And Mike, I guess it's fair to say, some of my colleagues, I think we had this successful bond that you mentioned, effort to really save us an enormous amount of money, the refinancing effort with our unfunded liability for pensions. But some of my colleagues now are talking about, wanting to bond on everything. And I've been, saying this for years, that the city would have to, if we didn't take care of things back then, that we may, be required to do that at some point in the future. And here we are now. That's what they're talking about. And my perspective has always been, if we're going to bond, I'd want to do it on some of the city infrastructure that is important and has needed upgrades for a long time, which includes like our police department and our fire stations and city hall, areas that are serving the residents in a totally different manner, that have been neglected. We've been doing patchwork on a lot of those areas, but what's your thought on this, right? Because if we start to bond on waterfront areas, then how do we sell to the residents that, well, we're going to need to do that for so many other things that are just as important, in many ways?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have great need throughout the community. We have hundreds of millions of dollars of capital need in the city. But that doesn't mean that we're going to reach a point of paralysis with our existing facilities if we don't spend that money, right? I mean, we've all come, it would be nice to be in a brand new city hall or a brand new police station or a brand new fire station, but it's not essential, right? We've been conducting business that we've been conducting for decades in the spaces that we are now. I personally feel, having lived through the sort of hopes and dreams of future new fire stations or police facilities or what have you, and then my mindset now is that on a pragmatic basis, we really just need to invest and rehabilitate in what we have today, not expect to scrape and build or a acquisition of a property and a new facility coming online in a brand new way. We need to come with, we're in a renovation mode, a reinvestment mode, not a replacement mode. And that's really how we're looking at our capital budget, and our recommendations is in that spirit. It's renovating as we go. When an office comes vacant in City Hall, we take the time to put new carpet in, make sure that we've got the right drywall in, that the HVAC in that area and the electrical outlets are up to snuff. And then we bring somebody in and they're in that office. We don't close a wing and shut City Hall down and spend $10 million to do it all at once. We have to do it more constructively and more strategically. And I feel that way about our police facilities. We're fortunate to have both the site at 200 North PCH. We're fortunate to be able to spread out into that space a little bit. That's taken away some of the pressure for us needing to maybe replace our police facility, our traditional station. So I look at it as an investment over time. And then I look at some of our big facilities as needing maybe more money than others. The lagoon, Seaside Lagoon is an example of that. We were fortunate to get $10 million from the state to help support that effort. We'll continue to go after grants for facilities like the lagoon. We have other sea level rise infrastructure needs in the waterfront. I'm hopeful federal grant funding and other resources can give us some support to get those things done. The Army Corps of Engineers, things like that. So I think if we bond, it's going to be for renovation. I don't think it's going to be for brand new. I just think we're at that point. We're an older community. We've been around a long time. We have older spaces, older structures. We need to invest in them. But I think it would be silly for us to assume that we could scrape and build and or replace. So I just think we're at that point. And, we spent so much time. We spent 10 years, 12 years assuming that there's going to be new facilities. And what happens when you do this? And this happened in the waterfront. You get complacent in your reinvestment in the space while you're chasing that new property, that new building, and things get worse. And then if that new building doesn't manifest and materialize, you're now 10 years behind on your renovation efforts. And I don't want to see us do that anymore. I want to see us invest in now and continue to work to make annual improvements in all of our spaces. So that's the spirit behind our CIP recommendations. That's the staff approach right now. Of course, if the council tells me, hey, Mike, go focus on finding a new piece of property so we can build a new public works yard, we'll carry that out to the best of our ability. But I think we have to be more pragmatic given our current level of resources, our community demands, and ultimately what we can afford given the diversity of need.
Great. Thanks for explaining. So let's shift the conversation to, things that we've been trying to work on for years, which everything takes longer than we want it to in government. And there's good reason why, most of it being that we operate in a democratic and transparent manner, and we are required to. But let's talk about like our Artesia Boulevard, Aviation Boulevard, the ACAP study, the parking study that's going on right now, and making both capital improvements in that area as well as policy changes that will hopefully create not necessarily a pen to paper public-private partnership, but something that over time allows for continual reinvestment in the area, both from the city perspective and from private entities that maybe are attracted to come in as a result of the things we're doing. And one of my goals has been to turn Artesia into that living street, that it should be and can be, that real true main street. But what are your thoughts on that? Because as we talk about, again, shifting more money towards the harbor, it means less ability for us to shift monies into that area, which has also been underserved for many years.
Well, I think the good news is the Artesia corridor is going to get a real shot in the arm with South Bay Galleria reinvestment, which is still going to occur. They are financed, they have capital, and they are submitting plans and specifications and permit applications to get to construction for their first phase renovation. So, that's going to be, out of the gate, a good $250,000 reinvestment on their part. For those who haven't seen the updated plans, I'd encourage you to go to either the city's planning page on the website or the South Bay Galleria page, where you can see kind of their reimagining of particularly the area that faces Artesia Boulevard. And I think the modifications to their plan, given the current economic climate, really make a lot of sense. And I think they'll be really positive for the boulevard in particular, the way they're going to face the new building. So it's really positive. I think that will help. We are also updating our codes as it pertains to what you can and can't build, and what you have to, in particular, what you have to do in terms of parking when you have certain uses, particularly restaurant uses. Our code is an old kind of retail, sort of mainstream retail focused set of requirements. It forces, in many view, an over parking requirement for certain use. Artesia over time has become more of a neighborhood serving corridor. It's not a regional shopping area outside of the Galleria. And you don't necessarily need that level of on-site parking to be successful. So the code in particular is being analyzed now to see if maybe we can relax or create more flexibility in our parking requirements to allow restaurants to come in and invest and really revitalize the space and boulevard. Most of the time when businesses come to us and say, hey, I want to buy that old Kurt's Hardware site, or I want to buy the old language school or the old mattress store, and I want to get a restaurant in there. It's really exciting. And the plans look fantastic and everyone's excited and jacked up about it. And then they go, oh, well, I notice here the code requires me to have X number of parking spaces for, X number of tables. I'm 50 spaces short, or I'm 12 spaces short, or what have you. Then they turn around and go, I can't build this project with your overburdensome restrictions. And so we're analyzing how we can create more flexibility, shared parking areas that could be used by more than one business at different times, maybe just lowering the standards in certain places, because candidly, with today's ride share, the level of biking, the pedestrians that would come, do we really need to have all those parking spaces? So I think times have changed in that regard, and we need to update our code to help the businesses invest and be successful. And we're working on that right now. I think our parking analysis will be concluded here in the next few months, and hopefully we'll make some changes that will allow businesses to come in and really jazz Artesia Boulevard up and bring it into the sort of contemporary time.
And we really haven't done a cost evaluation of how much it would cost us from an infrastructure perspective to widen sidewalks, to narrow medians, to create bike lanes, to really create that type of environment that attracts the multimodal, individual coming to the boulevard, when in your mind do you see us, getting to that phase, and how do we proactively, plan on investing into that area in the same way we look at, the way we've invested into the harbor or the Riviera Village?
Yeah, I mean, I think that follows that next phase of ACAP analysis, which is really right now focused on preferential uses and parking. I think we get back out into that street right-of-way conversation that we had when we first introduced the ACAP document. Artesia Boulevard is going to be due for a resurfacing here in the next couple of years. It's getting to that point. There are grant funds out there for active transportation implementations, and I think that conversation will naturally follow. The first shoe to drop has to be parking, because part of the offset parking conversation may come from on-street parking that's currently there. And we have to be careful about whether or not we repurpose parking corridors, for alternative lane use, and we have to understand that in the broader context. So I think the ACAP work, the analysis work will happen, and then we'll get right into streetscape design and try to determine how best do we want to adjust the right of way to make it a better, more living street-like experience.
All right, let's shift a little bit before we go to questions from the audience here. Streets and parks. There's a question here about, how do we see monies to get funded for? How do we add monies to the budget? Well, that's Ron. We add monies to the budget. The council, has that ability to do that by either not funding many of the decision packages Mike has talked about, or there's a little bit of a buffer that staff left in there this year, and so there could be some one-time funds. It's important to think about things that we fund as being either one-time or ongoing. And one-time means that it's just a one-time contribution to whatever effort it is. If it's ongoing, like salaries, right, then that needs to be built into the structural, core budget, and that becomes a little bit more of a complicated conversation. So I think for what you're talking about as it relates to, the Ito Family Park, that's something we can talk about more offline, and I would be happy to put something into my budget motion and talk, more directly with staff in the coming weeks about that.
I will say, as it relates to heritage and historical purposes, that one of the decision packages recommends $10,000 be set aside for additional historic museum materials and supplies that could be used to enhance some of our path of history monumentation and some of the other things that we do as we recognize the materials that are in there, and we've got the other initiative happening now with the new park, and the naming. So there is some money in there for at least that type of activity, maybe not specific to that park conversation, but it is reflective of the need to reopen the historic museum and really add to the quality of the supplies and the displays inside the museum.
Yeah. And Kelly asks about widening Kingsdale before the mall goes up. It's so narrow with all the buses. Now, I think in this next fiscal year, Kingsdale is set to be resurfaced from 182nd to Grant, not all the way to Artesia yet, because that'll be a second phase. So, Mike, I don't believe, though, we're planning on widening it, are we?
Well, we are planning on realigning Kingsdale. That is part of the final phase when we do go to restore the space where the current transit terminal is. We have an obligation to restore that space. There will be changes to the parkway landscaping along Kingsdale. There'll be a nice meandering path. There'll be new tree installations, parkway installation, and we are adding an additional turn lane northbound Kingsdale onto Artesia. So we're adding another lane to hopefully make that transition better. And we are realigning the turn, not fully, but we are realigning the turn to make that path of travel a little bit more visible, a little bit more easy to navigate. So that is part of the final project. Kingsdale, it doesn't get widened in the sense that the entire streets, getting larger, and we're adding 2 new travel lanes, but we are adjusting the alignment. We're adding to the sidewalk pedestrian space to make it more, better from that standpoint. And we are at least adding the additional turn lane as it relates to the intersection there at Artesia.
And that's part of the phase 2, because that happens after this phase that's this year.
Yeah.
So when you say realigning, does that mean there's a lot of kind of twists and turns on Kingsdale? Where is the realignment happening? Is it happening?
It's been a little while since I've looked at it, but I believe it's mostly north of living spaces. I don't think it's going to address the first twist and turn.
Okay.
If you're coming from 182nd Street going northbound, that first curve there around the light complex to the east, and then kind of working towards that primary entrance into the back of living spaces, that's, I think, going to remain largely. But as you navigate north towards Target, that intersection should improve, I believe.
Got it.
In that alignment.
Okay. All right. Well, there's so much to clearly talk about. Why don't we see if there's any questions from any of the residents who are on? If you have a question, use the raise hand function. It's usually on under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. And if that doesn't work for you, then just wave your hand and I will call on you. Okay, Georgia.
Hi. I don't have a hands up button, sorry. So thank you, Christian, and thank you, Mike, very much. Really interesting presentation. You make everything so clear. It was just great. So my comment is about some of the physical projects that we do around the city. And I'll give you the example of what made me start thinking about this, and then my idea of what maybe we could do, especially as it sounds like there's more staff coming on. On 190th, there by the mobile home park, there is a sign that says, we're entering Redondo Beach, or welcome to Redondo Beach. And several years ago, we had an older sign, and Mike, you said that we were getting ready to have a new sign, which we did. And I watched them put up the sign, and it's modern and it's nice. And they worked a long time on it. And then it was completed, and it seemed like it wasn't completed. The sign itself looked great, but the island before with the old sign had been kind of a dark green covering that I believe was just paint. Yep. So when they put up the new sign, they had to go in and tear up that. So there was a lot of that green paint gone. And then they had to pour new cement for the new sign. So now what we've got is new cement, which is very white, and part of the old green cement. And then we have like 12 to 15 inch weeds all the way around the island. So I'm thinking we spent a lot of time and we spent a lot of money putting up this very nice new sign. And I think that there should have been like a finisher to the project manager. Mm-hmm. Project manager should have said, okay, finisher, go out there, eyeball it, and tell me that it's okay. So if I had been the finisher, I would have come right back to the project manager and I would have said, that green's got to go. However we get rid of it, we've got to cover this with one color of cement. And an even better solution, I would have said, is, we can buy some river rock and we can cement some river rock into that very small island, and it'll look beautiful as we enter Redondo Beach. And then I would make sure that the gardener had that island on their agenda so that they, clean it up. Because honestly, when you're driving, you're looking down, and so what you see is the island. So that's my idea.
Well, George, I couldn't agree with you more. I drive that area quite a bit. I think we've talked about that in meetings in here before. And I too recently noticed the weeds and was not thrilled with that. And it's something we will be following up on. The two-tone concrete to no. We need to get that cleaned up. And there could be ways to actually enhance that median, as you described, with different architectural treatments. It wasn't, as we had hoped originally, a good candidate for landscaping. It just, by way of planting trees in that location, we have the pedestrian crossing, which has been improved there. I will say the new light standards, the new single crossing is greatly enhanced. It's much for pedestrians, much higher visibility for drivers, which is great. But yeah, that in fact, we have some off-colored curb too. We have the green cement. We have a kind of a faint yellow curb in one area. It's
right.
It needs some finishing work. You're absolutely right. We call that punch list, treatment, and that site could use a little more refinement. And I will definitely look into that.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you, Mike.
And yes, having more staff will help with those kinds of things.
Well, yeah, that's the first thing I thought. Yeah, they can go around. They can tell you what's needed out there.
Yeah, no, we do need that. And in fact, one of the proposed positions we're adding is a dedicated construction manager. So what we typically do is we have our engineers who pre-design, design, bid, and then when their project goes out to bid, contracts come in, they execute the contract, and then they manage the contract so it's the whole project start to finish. Well, as you can imagine, when you're getting to that finishing stage of construction, you're starting to think about designing your next project because there's so much work to do. But somebody who's focused on construction management exclusively starts to think like you as more of a finisher, as more of a completer, then frees up the engineers to go designing the next project while that individual concludes the work. So we're hoping we'll see a little better start to finish effort that staff change. But when you have 122 projects and you only have 7 people to do them, it's hard.
Oh yeah, that's why I thought new staff will be great.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have taken an hour for somebody to drive from City Hall to go back.
Yeah, no, and it's one of those things easy to spot, sometimes harder to actually execute the change because you've got limitations in the traffic code and you got to weigh, and it can be challenging. The weeds, clearly, that could be really
easy. That's easy. Yeah,
and
because
it's a little frustrating.
Mike, since the pandemic, so now we've had over 2 years and everybody's been at home. Well, the residents have really taken up the paintbrush. I mean, we have beautiful houses and fences and trees and flowers. So, the residents are pushing the city.
They are. It's great. And I'll tell you, one of the other areas of the budget that's seeing a lot of restoration is our park services, maintenance folks. We're in positions. And we're proposing a dedicated maintenance manager that would focus on the waterfront, which may feel like a waterfront effort, and it is, but it allows the current people who manage it to no longer be split into 2. So it allows us the ability to have greater supervision for what's occurring outside the waterfront, as opposed to having to do all things. And park services in particular is an area that needs on-site staffing help. Our crews, it's been a tough couple of years for our maintenance crews. They didn't get the working from home like many of us in other capacities. They're feeling a little bit beleaguered over this. So we're trying to jazz that back up, get them some help, and see if we can get back to a quality standard there.
Yeah, and we there was cuts made to those to a lot of those parks positions and public works positions. They seem to be almost the easiest ones to cut, Georgia, at times. And 2 years ago, Councilwoman MD and I, in our motion, we tried to keep some funding in there, because those are the ones that I think residents see. They see the effects of not having those employees right away, especially. And then to your point about that median, I did ask staff because it seemed like, why are we pouring more concrete? Why not just create a bioswale or, just something that has some small plants in it to just, beautify that area with the sign. And they were just too far along in the process, and there was some other reasons why.
Yeah, you have visibility issues there. That's the challenge.
Maybe
it grows up and you create problems for the lighting and
right. It's not good for plants there, but it could have been river rock. A lot
could have been something that exactly
Yeah.
that allows for water to infiltrate. So
Yeah.
I think,
and it still could be something like that. That permanently foreclosed on. We have that opportunity to make change.
Yeah, and I think in an overall, because I know this has always been important to Georgia, but staff is always looking for ways to create those types of scenarios. So even like the most recent concrete that's gone in at the end of Maria and Anita, that was just another one where I said the same thing, and there was reasons, from a technical perspective why they couldn't do it there as well. So, but when we can, we do, and we will, because
but they could have done river rock.
Maybe they could have.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
You can do river rock, assuming you don't have a pedestrian path to travel on top of the.
Right.
In either of these cases, so you're absolutely right. Trees. We've talked about trees in these meetings before. We do have a decision package specifically to funding the installation of, I think, over 300 trees next fiscal year. And on an actual contractor to hand water and maintain those for a period of year for them to actually establish themselves. So that is a big focus in our community. And we actually, I think we were able to find funds this year to plant, I believe, over 100 in new locations. So, we had talked about that, I think, a year ago, committing to that. We have been and will continue to roll that out.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. There's a question in the chat about getting an additional $91,702 for the community garden at Alta Vista Park. I haven't read through that yet. Mike, are you able to talk about that at all, or? That's okay. If you can't, we can always.
I don't believe as a recommendation, or is that a request, or is that?
Just as I noticed in the budget, there's at page 368. Oh, I think that's monies that we've already allocated. Would be my.
That's probably carryover.
Yeah.
It's in the budget document, not the CIP.
I don't know, because 368, I don't even have 368 pages here in the budget. So I'm not quite sure. I'll have to talk with Christine a little bit more about that.
I don't believe we've recommended any additional money. There is some money in there to replace the tennis windscreens at Alta Vista Park.
And at Anderson Park.
But that's not 90,000.
No, and we've already, so Christine, we did already allocate, we did already allocate monies to get the community garden up and running at Alta Vista, and that's going to be our trial one for now. And then that's basically, to create ADA pathways and help them get started. After that, it'll be up to the group. That
was $35,000 in total. There was money appropriated last year and might be carrying over for our sewer lift station at Alta Vista Park. There are sewer facilities there that have received appropriations. It might be that.
I don't know. Yeah, and that's on the other side of the park. So.
Yeah, not specific to the community garden.
Yeah. And then she asks about considering the green space behind Aviation Gym for a community garden in North Redondo. What is the process for getting that started? Well, I'll just say right now that, we have been looking at that space and talking about that space as becoming more of a permanent pickleball court area. But, per our conversation recently, clearly this is, a few weeks ago, that was the first time anybody talked about that becoming a community garden space. We'll just have to see what happens there. I think a few people have different ideas for that area, and we'll have to see what is the greatest need. The good thing about community gardens is that there are ways for us to do it, much like we're doing it at Alta Vista Park, at other regional parks and areas throughout the city on a smaller scale basis, so that the community gardens eventually, I think, serve a neighborhood, if you will, versus kind of being one community garden that serves an entire city. That was the goal of the council when we first started talking about community gardens a couple of years ago. But for now, we're getting started on the Alta Vista one, and I think we'll see how that goes, and then can have, I'll be gone by then, but the future council can have further conversations about, expanding that program based on hopefully the successes of the first one. All right, any other questions for Mike or comments?
I'll just put in a plug for continuing to resurface our streets.
We are, and I will say, we've talked about this here before, and so I'll make a quick little explanation and then let Mike get into a little more detail. But years ago in the early 2000s, the plan that we had for paving streets was very different than the one we are undertaking right now. The way it worked was it started in District 3, and half of District 3 got done one year, and then the second half of District 3 got done the next year. And then they moved up to District 5 and kind of did it in that same manner. And then District 4, and then the recession hit, and things slowed down, and it moved into South Redondo, and the sections that we were able to pave on an annualized basis became smaller and smaller. And so what was supposed to be like a 7 to 10 year program got stretched out to like 15, 16 years. And so about 4 years ago, we approved a new way of doing our streets, and streets are graded, if you will, based on, it's called a PCI. It's an index that measures how well that street, the functionality of that street and the deterioration or wellness of it. And it gets assigned a number between 0 and 100. 100 being the street is in tip-top condition, and 0 being its total disaster. And the rehabilitation or resurfacing of streets also comes in 4 different tranches, and they get, to our point before, exponentially more expensive depending on how deep you have to actually remove the street to fully reconstruct it. So what you've seen in the past couple of years is you've seen us doing a lot of slurry sealing throughout. We have 3 different programs going on. The slurry seal, which is used on streets that are okay. They don't require, the big machinery to come in and tear up the pavement and kind of do a resurfacing, so that's been working good. We also have the resurfacing program, which is where we kind of do a grind and overlay. And then we have a third tranche of money, which is really for the streets that are in just awful condition and they require full reconstruction, and that cost is just prohibitive. And so so what you'll see if you open up the CIP document, you'll see 3 different buckets in there. And the program right now, we're in year 2, I believe, of our 3-year program. And what we're doing is we're trying to be really strategic about it, where we're not just focusing on, again, one of those things like I would love to see District 3 fully repaved because it's been the longest. But at the same time, what made the most sense for us on a go-forward basis financially, and how could we increase our overall PCI level throughout the city? So, so you will see, Georgia, in District 3, a handful of streets getting slurry sealed and or repaved this year. Next year, there's not as many, there's very few in District 3. But again, we're strategically moving around, and when I'm gone from this council, next year, the council around the springtime will probably be focusing on the next 3-year plan. And setting that in motion. So Mike, do you want to just talk about, like, I did want to take some of the monies we had last year and just kind of set them aside so that we have the monies for our repavement programs, especially our full reconstruction ones, the rehabilitation program. But do you want to just talk a little bit about, why we're doing this strategy, and why we also to the points, I guess, that have been made repeatedly tonight, it's almost too much to do a lot in a given year.
Yeah, I mean, we can only safely oversee and administer, certain level and size of the street rehabilitation effort. I'll tell you, the proposed capital project budget, just about 40% of what would be a $90 million of total appropriations is dedicated for street projects. 30, I think it's like $36 million is there in for street efforts. So that's really kudos to our public works folks for going out and working grant applications and, being targeted with our local return resources through state gas tax and Measure R and Prop C and all the different things we as taxpayers have agreed to do over the last couple of decades. But we are putting the money to good use. Our pavement condition index, PCI, Christian referenced, on the whole as a city is right around 75. That may sound like, well, 75 out of 100, that's a C. That's not great. Well, in the world of paving, 75 is really solid. That's a pretty high number on an aggregate basis. Even your master plan communities that have been built in the last 20 years, you go down to Mission Viejo or Irvine, their PCIs are like high 70s, maybe 80 at best. So for us to be a over 100-year-old community and have a PCI at 75 is actually something to be proud of. So we'll stay at it. I couldn't agree more. Streets, it's about as important a thing as we can do. If we add a few more staff resources to manage the projects, we can expand our scope, get a little bit more of it done a little more quickly. That's our goal, but we have stayed really committed to it. And our engineering team has been really good about designing and then bidding and then building on a street basis for quite some time. We haven't been as good on the traffic calming build out. We haven't been as good on bicycle plan implementation build out. We've been a little slower there. And we haven't always been as good on, kind of building rehabilitations and the like. But streets of late, we've got down, we're doing pretty well in that category.
Yeah. All right. Kelly asks if there's going to be a 4th of July fireworks show. Yes, we did.
Yep.
But,
there'll be 2 actually.
2. Yeah. There's going to be same as last year, actually. So there'll be the one that the city puts on in the harbor area. And then the Riviera Village, and that this is a private show, but they're going to do one, I think, off of Avenue I. So that'll
Correct.
be launching from out in the ocean, and it'll happen just like last summer. It'll happen right after hours ends. So there'll be 2 consecutive shows, and I walk up to the top of the hill here, and you can watch one and then the other. So, all right, Joanne asks, she says, we have a 5-year plan and our budget supports that plan. The 5-year plan, actually, Joanne, is that's how we do our capital plan. It's always in a 5-year tranche. The budget is just for the single fiscal year, just to make sure we're clear on that. Does the council look at both in the budgeting process? Yes, we're looking at the budget and the CIP. And they both complement each other, but we are approving both come June.
And to put a fine point on that, the June 7th council meeting, the public hearing on the budget will be focused on our operations, staffing, maintenance and operations budgets. The June 14th public hearing will be focused on the capital program, the capital plan. So each of those meetings has its own emphasis. The council can talk about both all the time, of course, but we present with that focus in mind on those 2 different nights.
Okay, so then she asks, do we look at ways to streamline how we operate but still meet community requirements? Yes, I mean, that's, I think, a baseline operational mantra on a year-to-year basis. We are, to the points that have been made, I think, repeatedly tonight, right? We've been operating with a deficient staffing level for many years, and so that leads to deficiencies in the services we provide. But at the same time, we're constantly looking at how to streamline, and as we augment, I think, staffing, we will continue to do that. Torrance, Hermosa Beach, Manhattan Beach share a system for police and fire. Why doesn't Redondo want to join this teaming effort? Well, no. So let's be clear. Torrance has their own police and fire. Hermosa has LA County Fire and their own police department. Manhattan Beach has their own police and fire. And Redondo, of course, has our own police and fire. We do actually augment and work with each other. We have mutual aid programs. And so anytime there is a call for service, any one of the cities, if asked, can respond to that call. And we do, and it's reciprocal both ways. As a matter of fact, even LA County is a part of that process. So we do. We are looking at right now as part of the fire study and assessment that was recently discussed at council level. We are exploring potential ways to work hand in hand at an administrative level with division chiefs for fire services between at least some of the beach cities. Hermosa excluded because they're county. So we are. Oh, okay, hold on. You are.
Yeah, I think she was referring to the Regional Communications Center.
Talking about call center. Yeah. So right now we do have our own call center, and we are supposed to at some point. We've asked for a quote from the RCC, which some cities belong to, not all. I think Manhattan belongs to the RCC.
Hermosa Beach, Manhattan Beach, El Segundo belong to the Regional Communications Center. Torrance does not. Torrance has its own center. We have our own center. We have been attempting to get a quote for service from the RCC. They, over the last few years, have undergone significant staff transition. They have been trying to get their own financial house in order, and have not been in a great position to actually consider taking on additional cities. I think they're getting closer to being able to actually provide us a proposal and quote. But over the last several months, as we've asked and inquired about that opportunity, they've been working on internal housekeeping first. So eventually, I think we'll get an estimate from them and help us maybe make that decision as to whether or not it would make sense to co-locate with RCC.
Yeah, I went and did a tour of the RCC about 4 years ago with the mayor, and we've had this conversation. There's pros and cons, as with everything, to whether you want to go to a regional call center or you want to keep it in house. And so, to the points made earlier, I think we're always looking how to streamline our operations here, and we've made an enormous amount of investments into our communications center downstairs in the police department over the years. But we will see what happens there. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything else. Mike, any parting words before I leave everybody with Mark Hansen's message he left in the chat room for us?
No, the only thing I would say, if you're going to look at any one thing in the document, Christian alluded to it, the transmittal letter that's at the beginning, the message, it provides, I think, a fairly good summary, and it does describe kind of the thought process as to kind of what we're hoping to accomplish with this budget, where we're at fiscally, where our core revenues are at, where our core expenditures are at. It provides a fairly good synopsis, I think, a summary. I certainly hope it does, and I hope it's something that makes sense to you. Sometimes these messages can be really archaic and convoluted, and I hope that we've synthesized it now to be helpful as you think about the budget. And just take a look. There are a lot of things in there. There are 83 decision packages. They all have their own merit. And we're going to be talking with the council over the next several weeks on this. Our scheduled date of adoption is June 21st. There's plenty of opportunities to participate and provide input. I'd encourage all of you to, if you've got the time and interest, roll up your sleeves, take a look at the budget, and let us know if there's anything we can do to make it better.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, Joanna has one more question here, and it's about crossing guards. She said other local cities, they are contracted out. Why aren't we? Well, I think that is
decision package number. Oh boy,
I believe Joanna,
a little beat.
We started using a contract service last year in last year's budget, and this year we're actually augmenting that a little bit. And
Number 58, decision package 58, $155,000 recommendation to bring on contract crossing guards. We agree with you, Joanne. I think it is, it's a more efficient and sustainable model. We've really struggled. We have 22 locations where we staff for crossing guards. And when our own part-time employees don't show, it forces us to redirect a municipal service officer, a code enforcement officer, a CSO, and then sometimes even a police officer to meet that commitment. And that is not the best use of their time. So we're hoping our contract operator will give us more dependability and do it in a cost-effective way. So we do have that recommendation in the budget this year.
yeah, and I will be asking actually for a couple more crossing guards down right where you live, Joanne, at one of them being at Lilienthal and Ralston. So yeah, I'm glad to see that item on there. All right. So before we all go here, I just want to announce Mark Hansen had to leave the meeting here, but he wanted me to announce that the King Harbor amenities plan, the public boat launch ramp, mast up, there's a new community meeting related to the King Harbor amenities plan, and it's going to discuss just about everything that's been done in recent months through this group. It's on May 31st. It'll be from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. and you can register at KHA or khamenities.plan.com. So that, and I'm sure there's probably a link on the city website for that as well. So if you are interested in some of the more holistic ideas that we're exploring as it relates to the harbor area, then please, join this meeting on May 31st and weigh in on what you would like to see or not see. And with that said, Mike, thank you for taking time out of your family time tonight to join us. And everyone, we will see you hopefully in June.
Take care, everybody. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Christian.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.